Excellent. So now we're live. Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael Grabowski, a professor of communication here at Manhattan College. I'm also director of the new Game Design and Production program here at Manhattan College. So we're really excited about that. It's an interdisciplinary program across two schools and integrating more courses from different departments as we speak. So we're taking advantage of the resources across Manhattan College for that. This is a second of a series of panels that we've been having on the incredible changes of AI, and we've now introduced the concept of quantum computing as accelerating these changes in AI. And so tonight we're going to be speaking mostly about the ethics. What should we be watching out for? And I'm really excited that we have the panelists joining us this evening. Immediately to my right is Robert M. Gerarsi, professor of religious studies at Manhattan College. I just promoted you accidentally. Robert Gerarsi is the author of several books on the intersection between religion and artificial intelligence and robotics. His latest book is Futures of Artificial Intelligence, Perspective from India and the US, published by Oxford University Press this past year. Immediately to his right is Prashant Reddy. And Prashant, until very recently, was the managing director and chief architect for AI and data at JP Morgan. I say very recently because he is now the CEO and co-founder of an early stage technology startup on generative AI agents for enterprise. So we're really excited to have Prashant with us today. And then immediately to his right is Steve Randich. Steve is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer for FINRA. And so we're really excited to have all of our panelists here this evening to talk about these fast-moving changes and what limits, if any, we should be putting on that. So before we begin our discussion, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what's happened since our last panel on March 23rd. If you're not sure what we're talking about when we use these jargons and acronyms like AI, I encourage you to watch that video. It's on Manhattan College's YouTube channel from March 23rd, where we explain what generative AI and predictive AI and everything is. But since then, we've had an explosion of AI-themed products and services. We're just going to get the slide up here on the projector, and so we can see this is just a few of the companies that have been created in the last 6 months, or companies that are now integrating AI features. I myself teach digital storytelling, and we use the Adobe suite of software. And if any of you are familiar with Photoshop or Premiere or After Effects in your work, you'll notice that not only has Adobe integrated AI features into their program, but when you first start up the program, it wants to take you on a tour of those AI features. So it's pretty hard to avoid. But not only that, we have the big players are getting involved in this. And so we already, for a while, Google has been developing their AI features and they're releasing them to the public. Amazon Web Services has been introducing for clients AI, both generative and predictive algorithms for use. Meta, this is Facebook and Instagram, of course, has got their Llama 2 format. So beyond the OpenAI Institute's ChatGPT, which many of you have heard about in your courses, we have a lot of these big players involved in this. And we're looking at about, according to Goldman Sachs, by 2025, over a $200 billion investment in AI companies and research. So that's how quickly this is growing. One of the concerns about this, of course, is that these algorithms use a lot of computing power, and it takes a lot of electricity to run them and a lot of water or other resources to cool down the computers from the heat that they generate from these calculations. So while we might be running something generating an image in DALL-E on our computers, there's a data server somewhere out there that is not only generating that output for you, but also learning from your feedback and training itself and getting better. So the environmental concern is one aspect of what we need to be concerned about here. The bad actors, not only are we using AI for things like protein folding and solving traffic patterns and generating really cool art, but bad actors can generate a lot of misleading content. You may be already familiar with deep fakes. We have a presidential election coming up where deep fakes may play a big part in propaganda and misinformation in an election, and it's easier to generate than ever before. Cyber criminals, the breaching of security on cyber systems are all possible negative influences of what may come out of this. In fact, Matt, and let me pull this up here. My computer is slowing down here. So there are a lot of proposed regulations on how to regulate this. In fact, Mayor Adams right here in New York City has proposed new legislation for responsible use of AI, but the European Union is also in negotiations for its first AI Act. How do we either curb the advance of AI, or how do we regulate its use so that it's put to positive uses and not negative? Here in the United States, the U.S. Senate has already proposed legislation called the No Fakes Act, and this focuses specifically on using AI to generate likenesses and voices of real people without their permission. And so we've just settled a Writers Guild strike that limited the studio's use of having AI generate scripts instead of humans. And the Screen Actors Guild is still currently on strike, and one of their issues is the concern about having background actors paid for one day's work being scanned, having a 3D scan, and then having AI generate their lines and using those figures in perpetuity without paying those background actors. So we're sitting here talking about what should we be mindful of with AI. And there are others who are saying that that is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. And so Mark Andreessen is the co-head of one of the largest Silicon Valley venture capitalist funds a lot of these startup companies. And just earlier last week, he published the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, where he claims that the enemy is bad ideas, that a mass demoralization campaign for 6 decades against technology and against life, and that any form of ethical consideration in putting curbs on technological advance is actually prohibiting growth and possibly costing lives, according to Andreessen. So we can talk about that in a little bit as well. So we mentioned before that this isn't just a conversation about AI, but we're bringing in this concept of quantum computing. I just want to take a moment to talk about what is the relationship between the two. Well, first of all, AI does take a lot of computing power. And we might think of quantum computing as a huge supercomputer, but it actually does different kinds of calculations than a normal digital computer does. A digital computer works by means of ones and zeros. It's binary code. And so it does calculations of real numbers very well and very fast. But quantum computing uses something called a qubit or a quantum bit. And what we're really doing is supercooling substances, atoms really, down to close to absolute zero. And then using the quantum properties that happen when you cool materials down to that level to entangle particles and then manipulate them to create new forms of calculations. And it's kind of frightening how fast and how much data can be processed with a quantum computer. In fact, Just this week, China announced the Jinswing 3.0 quantum computer prototype that uses 255 photons to do processing. Now, what does that all mean? Well, essentially, the fastest supercomputer, non-quantum computer, can process some calculations that might take 20 billion years to solve, and this quantum computer can solve it in 1 microsecond. So as these computers come online and become available for use, you're going to see leaps and bounds changes in computing and a virtualization of our physical world. This is happening right now. In fact, IBM's quantum computer just up the road from us a few miles is available for use. And so if you want to do some educational or lower end experiments with quantum algorithms, you can do it for free right now on IBM's quantum computer. You just create an account and run it. If, however, you want to use the more advanced quantum computing or do more intensive processing, they have pay-as-you-go plans. This is available right now. This kind of concern about the leaps and bounds of quantum computing is leading the United States to restrict sales of the types of computing components that would be used to build both quantum computers and AI devices. And so NVIDIA traditionally is a video processor, video graphics card company. And so if you're a gamer, you know that you probably have a video display processor plugged into your computer, and it might be an NVIDIA chip. Turns out those chips are also very good for training AI algorithms, and so people are buying up those chips in the thousands. And so now the US incrementally has been restricting exports of those chips to other countries for fear that those countries might be building AI machines that will be used for nefarious purposes. So with that, I just want to open up our discussion and just start off generally about, from your experiences and your research and your discussion with colleagues, what do you see as, what are some of the promises of AI and what are some of the risks of AI? And I'll start with Robert and we'll work our way down.
Thank you. You want us to handle both of those things? I can't be just like the wet blanket. No, I think there are a lot of wonderful promises. I think there are opportunities to use advanced technology to help us solve pressing issues, right? The pressing issue in the world today is climate change. That is a problem that will literally render the world uninhabitable in many places. We need solutions to things that we have created, and it may well be that with effective AI technologies that we'll be able to advance some of those solutions, despite, as Dr. Grabowski noted, the environmental concerns of massive data computation. But I can think about things like a little heads-up display that tells me, well, you're about to do X, but here are options Y and Z, and option Y comes at no real cost to you, but is way better for the environment. So why don't you go that route, right? So that kind of calculation could really make the world a better place, and that kind of information delivery. I worry very much about, I'll give 2 domains of worry. One is surveillance. Under what circumstances are we surveilled? To what extent do we offer informed consent to the surveillance that we encounter on a daily basis? I think that we would really need a much better public conversation about what's appropriate and when. And the other is how we build algorithms. We build decision-making algorithms that do a lot of things, and we build those based on training data that are by and large deeply enmeshed with our own problems. Right? So judicial attempts to build judicial AI that can help with sentencing, that'll decide who should get parole and who shouldn't, that sort of thing. They're built on fundamentally racist data sets. And so as a consequence, their outcomes are racist. When Amazon tried to have a hiring system, it turned out that it would deliberately not hire women. And when they realized that, to their credit, they were like, oh, we're done with this, right? They stopped immediately. But the reality of it is if your data set is already prejudiced and you haven't built a system that says, here's how we take the data and transform it into outcomes, you're only trying to put guardrails on it on the back end. The guardrails on the back end usually don't work. And so you've taken a data set that's problematic and you turn it into this kind of closure that's supposedly an objective solution to the problem, right? And we've attempted to create algorithms to help us in decision making in a whole host of ways. We also have algorithms that help us do things like generate art. But if you go on to, if you use Stability AI and you wanted to generate pictures of certain kinds of people, those pictures will be deeply sexualized, deeply racist, and so on. And we haven't got the right tools in place for how to make sure those algorithms are delivering outcomes that are like productive toward human flourishing. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. I fully agree with Robert on both the positives and the concerns that he mentioned. So I'll just try to add to that. I'll endorse those, but also just a couple other aspects. So on the positive side, I think going back to the notion of climate change, kind of thinking about it more broadly as sort of sustainability, I think there's a lot of possibilities in material science, for example, just being able to design new materials. And there's a lot of work you can do in chemistry simulation where you can actually design new materials that could significantly change how we consume physical goods, and that might actually have the downstream environmental positive impact that we would like. Another example is drug discovery. So drug discovery is a place where like the molecular structure, protein folding, things like that. Again, a combination of AI and at some point quantum computing could really change that game and significantly lower the cost and accessibility of drugs to the whole world, and that would be a game changer. So those are sort of primary prerogatives for humans, and we should be pursuing them. So the question is, what is the downside? So if you think about it, what we want from AI, like the way I think about it is, you want it to be safe, you want it to be secure, you want it to be sustainable, and you want it to be humane. Right, so I'm just going to take a minute to kind of break each of those down, right? So what does it mean to be safe? Some of what Robert talked about, right? Does the AI, while completely well-intentioned, does the wrong thing for whatever reason, because it has bad training data, the algorithm's stupid, whatever it is, it just doesn't do what you would like it to do, right? And it's actually very easy to say we want it to do the right thing, but it's actually very hard to define what the right thing is. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen in that space. Then the second aspect, which is even harder, is secure, which means assume that either the AI or other people with access to powerful AI don't have your best intentions at heart, right? In that case, how do you protect the risk, the at-risk population? And that is an even harder problem because we haven't, as humanity, figured out how to do that without AI. So with AI, you're just kind of amplifying that problem, but it really kind of shines a light on our own sort of societal issues, right? The third part of it is kind of sustainable. I kind of talked about some of those things. There are positives that are, we're hopeful about, but there are real negatives that are happening today, right? Like energy use, water use, all of those types of things are real impacts today. So how do we kind of balance the positive with the negative? And lastly, the humane. This is the part that I worry about the most, is like, how do you sort of maintain the essence of humanity, whatever that means, and each of us probably has a different definition, and how does AI affect that, right? So the biggest one that I worry about as an immediate impact is labor displacement, right? A lot of jobs that we define and we've been prepared for, we went to college for, you're going to college for, may not exist in 5 years, 10 years, right? So what happens in those situations? What happens with reskilling? Like, how do people pick up new skills, and how quickly do you have to keep up with this AI? And lastly, I'll just touch on kind of the immediate impact of what we thought was the least likely thing to be automated, which was creativity, is one of the first things being automated, right? So the question becomes, like, what are our sort of biases about what is going to happen in which timeline, and how are those timelines going to get disrupted, right? So that uncertainty causes a lot of concern.
Yeah, I'm pretty amazed by the technology advancements that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years. I think there's a a concept called second half of the chessboard, which I encourage you to, Google that. We entered the second half of the chessboard in, I think by some estimates, 2006. And the public cloud computing, which emerged, roughly 10 years, 5 to 10 years after that, really gave us, for the first time, the massive horizontal scale that started to bring AI, which has been around since the 1940s, out of the theory into the practice and reality. And that has incredible opportunities associated, whether it's, solving, bioengineering problems, medical issues, as we mentioned, climate. There's a lot of very big problems impacting the human race that are going to be, the problems are going to be solved given the scale that we're talking about with the technology that's emerging. The public cloud computing has allowed us to really move forward on starting to unlock some of the benefits of AI. My company is one of the largest Amazon Web Services clients. We've got over an exabyte in the cloud right now, and it's allowing us to do surveillance and insider trading and fraud opportunities that really weren't possible when we were, in a vertically scaled environment in our data center. So I think the opportunities for companies and for the sciences are going to be incredible. I wish I was 20 years old right now to actually be able to see it as part of my career. But there is a downside. We mentioned the employment. A lot of the technologies that have emerged, at least in my career, have allowed for the service industry to be impacted, whether it's point of sale staffers or help desk people. What this technology is going to do is it's going to impact artists and more highly educated staff and people, which is a concern. The other thing is that things like ChatGPT and other of these technologies, and we mentioned the quantum computing from IBM, they're not very sophisticated in the early days. Somebody was describing to me yesterday ChatGPT being a kindergarten with in almost infinite vocabulary. And this means that they're easy to either inadvertently or deliberately misuse. Now, on the inadvertent misuse, we've seen, in a lot of examples that I can mention. There was the flash crash of 2010. I experienced, when I was at Citigroup, a accidental algorithm losing 25 million in 4 seconds before it was caught, unhedged. So that's an issue. Whether it's an ethical issue or not, these problems exist through accidents that have a big impact on businesses and people. But also within the space already, early days with things like large language models and ChatGPT, we're already seeing, brokers using robo-advisors to harm investors. We're seeing them creating bad products deliberately to sell to clients. And there's just a lack of transparency, so it's harder to police this. And that is, in and of itself, a problem.
Thank you. Given all of the concerns and risks that we mentioned, as well as the promises, what sort of ethical framework should we use when we're thinking about the development of AI? What should we promote? What should we watch out for? And if you were to write a law or a regulation, what would that be? What would you focus that on? And I'll open this up to anyone who would like to comment on that.
I can start. So one aspect that I often think about is when we think about or when we talk about AI, we talk about AI as a singular, the AI, an AI. But in reality, I think what is much more practical is many AIs. part of the diversity of AI progress will come from investing in lots of different AI efforts that are all sort of targeted at different priorities, different trade-offs, and with that, we will learn, right? So maybe 50 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 1,000 years from now, it will be clear that there's really just one way to do things, and it should all just be one AI. But I think we're very, very far away from that. So even as these AI technologies get rapidly advanced, I think it is important to encourage diversity in the approach towards building them, to how you evaluate them, how you pay for them. All of those things. Some of them should be available as common social services, like just available to everybody for free to use. Some of them should be very, very expensive, right? Because they are dangerous and they have to be appropriately controlled. And creating that sort of framework of thinking about it is not an AI and there is not one outcome here. It is all the different AIs that need to be created for different applications and set in different contexts, and how do you kind of create a framework that actually can cater to that diversity of settings is one way I think about it.
What I would say, there's a lot of industry efforts to make sure that these products can't be exploited by the bad people. There's the OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Frontier AI. I think it's great, but I don't know. I'm not very optimistic that they're going to stay ahead of the bad guys. Bad guys, particularly in the industry I'm in, which is stock market, stock trading. What I've always said, when the product is money, it attracts the best bad guys around, and so we see them a lot. And I just am not very encouraged by our ability to police them. So for example, we see insider trading, just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's actually happening in reality. This technology is just going to make it a lot easier for the bad guys to get away with the crimes that they're already trying to execute on today. But it's going to be faster and less transparent. In the more traditional IT, where you develop software the traditional way, you control the inputs. This technology will change as the inputs change, and the human might not, very likely won't be involved in influencing those changes. There's a whole concept called model development life cycle that is very immature at this point, that puts controls in how these models' behavior changes over time as the environment and the data around them changes. And the human element that basically provides some regulation and guardrails is removed. So we're increasing the speed and the power, and at the same time reducing the supervision over the technology, which is scary.
Yeah, broadly speaking, I worry that we don't necessarily know why we're building AI, and I think solving that problem in a host of domains would be pretty useful. A lot of those companies that you mentioned early on are basically just companies that latch onto ChatGPT and then try to sell ChatGPT in some business domain or another, right? It's not that we really have hundreds of new technologies in the last 6 months. It's that we have hundreds of new people trying to make money off of one kind of technology. If I'm building a company to build bridges, I know what my purpose is. I want people to be able to get over rivers or over chasms. If my exclusive purpose is I'm trying to build a thing that's going to make me some money using somebody's other technology, that strikes me as a kind of fundamentally dubious place to start. I do think we need to think very clearly about how we engage the law to help that process. And including if we're concerned about bad actors, we need to do things that financially incentivize the design of tools that do good things in the world. For example, when you mentioned deepfakes early on, one, at this point, relatively small scale, in terms of the number of people affected, but which is traumatic in its impact, are things like revenge porn using deep fakes. We should be using government money to subsidize people to create protective technologies that would enable folks to identify that sort of thing and act on it to protect themselves. We ought to be genuinely trying to make it possible that people would build tools that help us. If we're worried about deepfakes in the news, I need my web browser to tell me that it has some belief that, belief's not really the right word, right? It's an AI, it doesn't have beliefs. But that according to its calculations, its output indicates that the current new picture I'm looking at, the video I'm looking at, that these are questionable. They probably didn't come from the source they claim to be, or they've been doctored or whatever else. We should be funding that publicly so that companies can build that sort of technology, because it's frequently not as profitable as other kinds of technology. But technologies that are in the public good, we should be paying for. And perhaps even have a public cost to certain other kinds of technologies. I'm thinking back to when I was young and we had the blank tape tax, and our students in the audience have no idea what a blank tape is. But there was a time when there were blank audio tapes and video cassettes, and the publishers of music and movies and so forth were outraged because you could copy their product and then share it with someone else and not pay. And so there was built into every single blank cassette tape that anybody bought a small little tax. And that tax went to a little pool, and that pool went to the publishers as a kind of compensation, because we knew that even though a blank tape might be used for nefarious purposes of stealing from music publishers, the technology was a useful one, and it had lots of really good purposes. Aside from making cool mixtapes for your either existing or would-be romantic partner, right? That there were other uses for magnetic tape that were quite productive. And so we wanted the technology to flourish, but we also wanted it to flourish in a way that was, fair to others in the economic sphere. And so there was a little tax on that. And I don't see any reason why we can't be in a position in regulation to go, I get how your technology is useful. I also get how it looks like it has some problematic uses. And so here's how we're going to handle it financially. And then maybe we use that money to incentivize the kinds of technologies that we think have kind of purely public good outcomes associated with them.
That's really fascinating. We talk about any technology as being a Faustian bargain, in that you're gaining some things, you're getting some benefits, but you're also giving up some things, and you're oftentimes creating unintended consequences. I just want to bring up this one example. This just was released 3 days ago, but there's a new open source algorithm called Nightshade. Now, a lot of artists are concerned that their art is essentially being stolen by these AI algorithms, that they're looking at their images and they're using them as part of their training data sets to produce other images. And some artists have complained that other people have produced AI art that resembles their art. So this open source piece of software essentially poisons the digital file that is your art. And so you can't see it. It's not a visible thing. You can look at an image or a photograph or a picture, and it looks like, or a piece of audio, and it looks or sounds exactly like you would expect. But when an AI algorithm ingests it, it's fed false information. So for example, if you have pictures of a dog and the AI says, okay, this is a dog, it starts thinking that that's a cat, so that when you ask the AI algorithm for a picture of a dog, it produces a cat. So there's a little bit of a crossing of a line with this algorithm, from restricting your content from being ingested and used to actually poisoning the entire algorithm. So, with that as an example, I'm just wondering what everyone thinks about the trade-offs between acceptable use and stifling innovation or censorship. We've all had this experience with social media where sometimes you'll post a picture that has aesthetic merit or is completely innocent in nature, but that image gets flagged by the social media for claiming that it's offensive or obscene. And the social media algorithm is attempting to try to remove offensive images from its site, but in so doing sometimes comes up with false positives. So I'm wondering, what do you think about where that balance is between acceptable use and censorship?
Steve, do you want to go first, or I mean,
It's easy for me and others to say, yes, we should slow it down because, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, these things, when they get released to the public domain, are unsophisticated. They're problematic, and they can easily be misused by people that expect to use them well. So I should say, yeah, we should slow it down, be more cautious and careful. But there's a lot of things that have changed in the software industry in recent years. Anybody can produce software and put it in the open source environment. Anybody can download it for free. I don't know how you control that. It's kind of like, the U.S. taking a very strong position on controlling emissions, yet we've got countries in the Far East that aren't. So we're penalizing ourselves when somebody else just goes ahead and does what they want to do. I don't know how it can be an even playing field in this environment at this point, just because of the fact that software is regularly put in the open source community and anybody can do that.
if I could just add to some of the horrors of this situation, when we want to regulate for good cause, right? When we want to censor for good cause, for example, sometimes the public resists. For example, there was an outcry against the image generating technology that Stability AI was producing, because it could very easily produce things that were pornographic, including illegally pornographic. So they put some guardrails in and they tried to limit what the thing could do, and also to try to make it a little less racist and that sort of thing. And their users actually complained. And so they backed off and they were like, oh, all right, whatever, we're taking the guardrails off. So sometimes even someone trying to do kind of a well-meaning thing, we, the public, actually stand in the way. And that's a real issue because, for example, I was discussing this with a police officer a couple of weeks ago who works in information stuff. And he worries about people being able to generate things like child pornography because it has a kind of feedback loop that leads to abuse. And an image that's child pornography is illegal. If you have it on your laptop, even if it was generated by AI, you go to jail for that if they know. But Stability AI gets downloaded to your computer and you can do things on it without internet access. But so this is like a real issue that people want to try to like put the kind of censorship guardrail on there, and it's hard to figure out how to do it, especially if people don't like it. And then on top of that, one more like really depressing fact is that you then have to train things how to identify whatever traumatic, horrible thing you don't want it to allow. And the way that we train them to identify that is we pay people terrible, terrible wages in foreign countries to stare at image after image after image all day long, identifying traumatic, horrible things. That's a terrible job. That might be the single worst job in the world. And it's doing terrible psychological trauma to the people involved in it. And it's hard to know how we're going to get around that particular problem because we do, at least for the foreseeable future, need human judgment to say that is and that is not acceptable. So we have both the problem of different people have different standards of what they want to call acceptable or not acceptable, and then we have a further technological problem in actually enacting anything we might be hoping to do in terms of protecting ourselves as a public.
Two things. One, on Robert's last point, that is one of the most terrible things about kind of the labelers and the psychological impact on them. One sort of counterproposal, again, not original for me, I'm just repeating other people's work, is that part of the benefit of letting the software out early and kind of developing it in the open, acknowledging its limitations and developing it in the open, is that we all get to collectively shape it, right? So rather than paying the people in the Philippines or wherever to do all the labeling for us, maybe if we could all sort of collectively share that burden, and you had 8 billion people doing that instead, maybe the collective trauma on us is lower, right? So there is sort of that argument about what is the best way to convey the collective human intelligence to the machine, assuming that there are good reasons to make the machine smart. So there are sort of, again, how do you actually make that happen? Like, what is the physical means by which you collect the people's intelligence? And maybe it is actually to put products out into the real world and just put some caveats around it and say, hey, this is not a fully baked thing, right? I don't know the answer, but the other part about censorship and acceptable use, I think, in my opinion, kind of goes back to the answer I gave earlier, is around it depends on context, right? When I am on Facebook, I probably have a different threshold for what I am willing to consider as acceptable content. When I'm at work, and I'm in sort of financial institutions like the bank's internal network, that threshold is a lot lower, right? So having more specific context in which you are using the AI actually makes it somewhat easier to kind of define where that boundary is. When you're trying to do it as one global standard, it's a lot harder.
When we talk about standards of obscenity or indecency, oftentimes that's defined in law by local community standards. That's oftentimes the phrase that's used. It's difficult to define a local community standard when the standard is in cyberspace, when there is no geographic locality to it. Sometimes when we accelerate a technology or just amplify it, we get orders of magnitude of changes to allow new things to happen. We have emergent qualities. And so I mentioned at the top of this session the issue of quantum computing. Some of the great benefits like solving protein folding and developing more energy efficient electric batteries, as well as some of the nefarious uses of quantum computing. So I'm wondering if anyone would like to talk about what you're concerned about or what you've been hearing or talking about as quantum computing goes online and has more people has access to it.
I think the biggest and most noteworthy risk of quantum computing is its ability to allow hackers to unencrypt data. And it's an addressable problem, but it's going to require that our cryptography models be replaced and changed. And the standards, the industry standards associations have already started that. But a lot of the encryption methods are in hardware and software and programmed into firms' business applications. And the prediction is that it's going to take 10 to 12 years to replace all of those algorithms to make them post quantum computing safe. That's a lot of time, and I'm afraid that, and there's always laggers and leaders, right? And it's going to be the laggards that aren't even going to make that 12-year window, and most predictions now have quantum computing coming online and to fruition earlier than that, which is a pretty negative outlook in my mind.
I'll come back to that one about cryptography. Just kind of touch on the positive side again, just to say quantum computing can be a complete game changer when it comes to simulating physical systems, right? Similar to how AI has changed and introduced new capabilities into our vocabulary, quantum computing does have that promise, and could unlock a lot of things around energy, like fusion energy and things like that. So it is worth doing. But let me tell you about something I read about, which is immensely scary. So today we don't have post-quantum cryptography implemented everywhere. So for anyone that doesn't know, post-quantum cryptography is a cryptographic algorithm that is safe even in the presence of quantum computers. So the assumption is that a quantum computer wouldn't be able to break that encryption algorithm. Now, as Steve mentioned, it's not completely standardized, so it's hard to actually implement today. And over the next few years, it will get standardized. But there is a cost, an increased cost to using these algorithms, at least as of today. But a scenario that someone played out is, today we are on WhatsApp and it's all encrypted and my Google messages are encrypted, and we assume that that's all safe. Nobody's going to be able to read it, right? But imagine the scenario where someone's capturing all of your encrypted communications and just storing them, putting them on a disk and hiding them in their garage. They pull them out 15 years from now when they have a quantum computer and they can unencrypt all of it. Right? So have we considered the implications of what is happening today? And, are we taking the necessary precautions today? Sometimes we don't even have the tools to take the precautions, right? So my advice to all of you is, don't assume that anything is encrypted is actually, unknowable to other people, right? So, but that's practical in some scenarios, some impractical in other scenarios. So there are real concerns with quantum computing. But again, the promise is compelling enough to pursue it. Right?
I'm just a lowly religious studies professor whose coding background was modest to begin with and a long time ago. But it's worth noting that, at least as far as I understand it, a quantum computer doesn't just sort of replace your computer and do it a whole lot faster and better. It solves different kinds of problems, but the kinds of problems it solves super, super fast, right? The protein folding kind of problems, traveling salesman kind of problems, the sort of problems that your computer is just going to take a billion years to solve, it can solve them very, very quickly. So it's not that it instantly changes the way all computing works. It just changes certain things. And some of those are awesome. And some of them, the encryption problem is really, really problematic. But it's not just a matter of time to solve. It's a funding question. Just recently in this country, we passed a bill to fund the IRS, so that part of what was going on with the IRS funding bill was to take their antique computers and replace them with more modern ones. So if you're trying to replace, and you have to think about the sweeping relevance of the government and how, for example, control over the energy sector. This goes back to the kind of horrible nefarious actor scenario, but a nefarious actor who can break into our energy system, who can break into our defense systems, the outcomes for that would be catastrophic. And so if we're not foresightful about how it is that we're going to prepare to defend those systems, and quite lavish, frankly, in funding it. I mean, we need to pay that money to make sure that those systems, that they're not the laggards, that we're not looking. I mean, I've literally seen computers in people's offices in the last few years, not here on campus, but who were using computers that struck me as being 10 or 15 years old, that probably couldn't even run whatever you needed, so it's also a question of how do you update all those software systems? People have legacy software systems that are very old, and it's expensive to update them because, hey, we've been using this software system for 15 years. And so we really do need to think about how we're going to be on top of that problem. How are we going to fund that problem? And how are we going to make sure that the most vulnerable sectors of our community are in fact safe? And that will cost money. That's going to cost like real devotion by the community, and we'll have to own up to that.
I'm just processing that, and I'm old enough to remember Y2K, where computers were programmed with a 2-digit year. And there was a concern as we approached the year 2000 and all those computers reset back to year 0 that there would be a lot of chaos. And there ultimately wasn't a lot of chaos, but that was partly because there was a lot of money and energy spent in updating that software, re-engineering software. I knew a lot of friends who made quite a bit of money being hired by those companies. Yeah, I'm wondering. So possible career paths as quantum computing comes online. Let's have both a little fun and a little trepidation here, and imagine what is the worst possible outcome. We have AI. It's accelerated by quantum computing. What's the worst possible future that you might envision if we don't do anything?
Can we balance it with what's the best possible outcome?
I think yes. Yeah.
I mean, the worst possible outcome for any question is we're all wiped out, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the question is. That's always the answer, right? So in this case, it's no different. I think, I do think, I mean, it is not, it's not something that you can scientifically disprove that that's a possibility. So you always have to account for that as a possibility, however remote it is. But I personally don't think that's a very likely outcome. I worry a lot more about the risks that are introduced by AI's limitations rather than its capabilities. So today, AI technology is still, nascent. It's very, very young, and there are a lot of things that it doesn't get right. It hallucinates, as they say. It's like it makes up facts, right? When it reasons, it doesn't necessarily get it right. It makes bad judicial decisions. All of those things, it's subject to hackers, kind of prompt hacking and things like that. So all of those limitations probably cause more immediate risks for us. And I actually think the solution to addressing those is not necessarily to slow down, but to accelerate the development within a certain framework, right? Towards this framework of being able to evaluate in the open. But to me, that notion of saying, hey, this is dangerous, so let's set it aside, I actually think is the biggest risk.
Every week, this week it was the Alaska Airline pilot who tried to kill 85 people. It was the guy in Maryland that shot the lawyer and then went off and killed himself. If somebody's willing to kill 85 people and themselves, what's the difference between that and 85 billion? And so I worry about our nuclear codes being exposed. I worry about our energy and electrical grids being exposed. The worst case, little bit of counterpoint here, I really worry about the worst case. And every day that moves forward, I worry more. And I don't know what the answer is necessarily, but this technology is profoundly different than everything I've seen in my career.
There's definitely plenty of room for even realistically hyperbolic predictions about what the technology might do to save us, to doom us, et cetera. I'll limit my thoughts to what I consider most likely kind of outcomes. And as I said, I heartily agree that problems of things like defense system and energy systems, we need to solve that. I have a fair bit of faith that we will, in fact, act on that and solve those kinds of issues. What I see as the most likely problem is that we would devote ourselves collectively to using AI to do nothing better than to generate wealth. Because if the only thing, our only purpose, is how are we going to make money with it, we will find endless ways to do that in terrible fashion. Not saying that we shouldn't be trying to generate wealth, build companies, et cetera. What I'm saying that I perceive as a likely terrible outcome is that that would be all we were pursuing, that we weren't really pursuing anything with a purpose, that we no longer really understood that we were supposed to be trying to create a civil society that made sense and that benefited people. And the flip of that, though, is that the most likely good outcome is that we actually use AI to augment our decision making, to accelerate our ability to make good decisions, and that we actually use the technology to actually solve problems that we are facing. And that we could, in theory, and we've got a lot of problems that we're facing. So I'm actually very hopeful that we would use these technologies in wise ways, or at least that there's some significant portion of people who would use them in wise ways. And so for me, the two things are really quite connected. And my hope is that the public conversation over AI ethics is one that allows us to try to generate future outcomes that are positive instead of negative.
Can I respond to that? Mostly agree with what Robert said. The only thing, again, it's not a disagreement, but maybe a nuance, is I actually don't think making money is a bad thing. Because people pay when they have problems that need to be solved, right? If you are using a technology product that you're not paying for, that's when I would worry about it. Because a lot of times, there's this famous saying in sort of the startup world or the big tech world, which is, if you don't know what the product is and you're not paying for it, you are the product, right? Your data is being harvested and sold and used in ways that you may not like, and you have to be very wary of that. And this is sort of a societal responsibility on us to say, hey, how do we want to use this technology? Where do we want to incentivize the development of this technology? That's what we should be willing to pay for. And that's, not just all of us have to be able to say, here's how we want this technology to be developed. Here's the types of problems that we want it to solve. And a market-based mechanism is actually not a terrible way. It's not a perfect way by any means. We all know why regulators exist and why governments exist, and all of those things have to be balanced, but I don't necessarily want to completely, as a startup founder, I have a bias, but even besides that, I do think market-based mechanisms are a good way to make sure that resources are allocated to the right problems.
I actually have a quick follow-up. I actually think AI could do something wonderful in the domain of stuff that we don't get done because there aren't enough people to pay for it, right? You can think about, for example, illnesses that don't get real research because there just aren't many people who have them. There's only a few people who have that, so it's not profitable for certain companies to invest in those kinds of diseases. And if we get to the point where, for example, and AI is already being employed in things like pharmaceutical research and so forth, all of a sudden stuff that wasn't maybe profitable at one point in time to talk about could become profitable because now I don't need a whole fleet full of researchers and 12 lab spaces. I'm just going to sick my machine on it, and I might get an actual, some testable stuff, and then I can move that forward. So, there are ways in which, kind of the flip side, people will pay for a product, but sometimes there aren't enough people to pay for it. And it might actually help with that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with that. I think that for those of you that are economics students, there is this notion of a marginal cost of any new product. And if you can reduce that marginal cost because of technology, then you will actually have a lot more products that are targeted to specific use cases. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Really fascinating. We're going to open it up to questions in just a minute. We're just asking folks to line up by the stand. I'll put a mic over there just so that the people who are watching on YouTube Live or on Broxnet can see you as you ask. So as you're thinking about a question that you might want to ask, I'm going to follow up with just one final question and try to end this on a more positive note. And that is, we have, well, it is. And I want to follow up on that. We have a lot of students in our audience this evening. And so what can they do to prepare for a world that has AI and quantum computing in it? What opportunities are there for them, and what sort of codes of ethics should they be constructing for themselves as they enter this world?
If I were a student, I would want really clear sense of how we're going to use technologies to advance productivity rather than replace people. Students sometimes enjoy a shortcut from point A to point B. Hey, ChatGPT can sort of quasi give me 750 words on this subject. It actually can't. It'll probably give you 500 words because it doesn't count. And then it'll make some stuff up along the way. But whatever, like if you're thinking I can use the technology to just replace my own labor, you've literally written yourself out of the workforce. So that's not a very solid strategy for your own future. So instead, you could be thinking, all right, well, I want to learn the skills that have to do with all the kind of reading and writing and thinking and all the stuff I have to learn in this domain or that domain. How can I use the AI in ways that are actually going to help me do that better rather than replace me? And I think that that's a collective process between those who are educators and those who are students, that we ought to be trying to figure out that process for you, that you ought to be thinking, how do I make sure this helps me in 10 years and not displaces me from my job in 10 years?
I think along those lines, I mean, you know, I think most of you probably are students in the audience. You're probably not defined by your job yet, right? Like, I think there are generations of people that basically started a career in their, you know, late teens, early 20s, and basically did that for the next 30 years and retired. And I think modern society and sort of modern technology doesn't really allow that anymore. I think our jobs evolve throughout our careers, and I think, you know, most of you being younger than we are, you're going to be forced to adapt faster than we've had to in our careers. And you know, every 5 years you might have a different job. Every year you might have a different job. So part of what I would think about is, how is AI and all of these other technologies helping me evolve myself into doing something new, something different, something creative, something more productive, to Robert's point, and how can I best leverage this technology? I think defining yourself into a corner and saying, all right, I'm just doing this until AI replaces me is kind of, I don't know, too passive an approach for my taste.
Yeah, I would agree with what these two gentlemen just described as, you know, making sure that you can see where the puck is going here and planning your career and your education around it. I grew up in the software industry, so I was a programmer early in my career, and we're now doing prototypes at my company that show that it's entirely possible to replace traditional programmers with this technology. That is one job that I thought was always going to be safe, and it's not. So imagine how many other jobs. They say paralegals is another one that's going to go away. These are jobs that require education, in some cases advanced degrees. So you're no longer safe by just getting a college degree. Unfortunately, that was probably true when we were growing up, but you guys are getting a different hand of cards than we got.
So I don't have a mic in front of me right now, but I'll encourage anyone, if you have any questions, this is a great time to come on up. If I could just ask you to say your name and ask a question. And we always have a tradition here at Manhattan College that a student asks the first question. So I'll sit here quietly and wait until someone comes up to a mic.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sean Lee, and I'm a economics finance double major here at the Malley School of Business. There's been some research done that has showed that over the span of time, life expectancy of people in general has continued to rise, and as such, you see workers staying a lot longer than you'd expect them to. Average age of retirement before was normally around 65, but lately you've been seeing that people have been wanting to work for longer because they can, and they can keep on going for much longer. Do you think that with the integration of artificial intelligence in the workplace, there could be any cost in terms of trying to bridge any generational gaps and fears and like the difference in generational excitement in trying to make use of artificial intelligence? Like, do you see how for older generations it might be more difficult for them to not only grasp the concept of using it, but also just objectively learning how to use it as well?
The old people here remember VCR technologies, and every VCR in America had one thing in common besides the fact that it played VCR cassettes, and that thing that it had in common was, you guys remember, they all flashed the same thing, 12, 12, 12, because no one could figure out how to program the VCR clock to say anything else. Yeah, we'll have issues around people not being able to work with particular technologies, but we're also, I mean, both extending lifespan and extending, providing kind of AI-enabled labor means we also have to just be, quite frankly, thinking about how people are going to have roofs over their heads. And the first people talking about things like universal basic income, we're talking about it in the 1960s. I think that's when that particular phrase was invented. And a lot of them were people who were like what we would call transhumanists. They were thinking about how technology was going to allow them to overcome the limits of their human bodies. And they were like, we're all going to live forever. And when we all live forever, how are we going to, have jobs and everything else? And so they were like, we got to figure out the technology so that it just does all the work, and then we benefit. I don't know how effectively we're prepared to think in terms of how we're going to shelter all the people. We're not really doing an awesome job of it now, but in combination with these issues, and actually there's more recent research in America on lifespans that's pretty discouraging. But when we think about extending lifespans, no matter whether that's 2 years or 20 years, that has an impact on the workforce. And when we talk about AI assisting us in our work, so that maybe one person can do, even if it's just modest, one person can do 20% more work. Well, that means if you've got 5 people, they're doing the work of 6 now. So one person doesn't need a job, right? And we absolutely have to figure out a way to address that problem, especially if and as it continues to ramp up. The labor market problem is significant.
Couple of things. I think one aspect is I'm very much 100% worried about job displacement, right? But that said, I am actually not fatalistic about it in that, yes, that 6th person doesn't have a job, but you could also look at it as, well, that 6th person should now be doing something else or could now be doing something else. So that depends on what your position is on sort of globally, are we oversupply on labor or are we undersupply on labor? And I actually think we're undersupplied on labor. Like in general, we don't have enough people to do all the things that we want to do. So as long as we're effectively able to redeploy people into the areas that we want them to be doing stuff, it's actually a good thing that we're making people more efficient. What I worry about is that in previous generations, that happened over generations. So I don't have the same job my parents did, my kids probably won't. And whereas now I think within one single person's career, you probably have to make that shift, and that's the hard part, right? There's a second thing I was going to say, but Steve, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I would agree that there's more capacity in the world for more labor, more work. Just from my perspective, like when I see our regulation, it's like finding a needle in a haystack to find bad things, and we need more people looking for those needles. But I also think, as people age, and let's say, the longevity of workers starts, keeps increasing. Although I have read that, substance abuse issues that are more prevalent now than they were maybe a generation ago are starting to impact that. But that aside, I think the productivity tools that we saw during the pandemic, some of us more than others, that allowed people to work remotely far more productively than a generation ago, or even a half a generation ago, is going to allow people who are older and may have some disabilities, right? I'm going to sort of correlate disabilities with being, beyond retirement age. They'll be able to work remotely more effectively because of the tools that will continue to see evolve in a very good way that'll allow people, to contribute.
Yeah.
Can I just go back? I remember what I was going to say, Sean. The part about different people being able to adopt the technology at different rates, I think that is very real. I already see that every day. Like as an AI researcher, I'm immersed in how to prompt ChatGPT or how to use the underlying APIs and all of that. And when I interact with ChatGPT, if you compare that to how some of my other family members interact with it, older or younger, it is very, very different, right? And I think that is part of the natural evolution. I mean, I remember like 10 years ago when we were all Googling everything, and some of my family members, older family members, didn't quite know how to Google things, right? But now they've caught up, right? So there's always going to be that lag, that generational gap, as you say. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, right? Like you don't necessarily want everyone to leap in at the same time. Having that bridge is probably a good checks and balance.
All right. Yeah. I just have two follow-up questions, I guess. So, I like to think that the way most market exists is in a bell curve shape where there's like a peak point that you want to reach in terms of stability, productivity, or profitability, and then before that, it's not enough, and then after that, it falls off. I mean, just an example that I'm familiar with someone of my background would be like monetary policy or like controlling inflation rates. If you do too much, then the economy's growing too much. You might need to contract a little bit, but if you're doing too little, you might see deflation or like a recession or something of that matter. You want to find that middle ground. We've talked so much about the growth that artificial intelligence can have. Is there a point where you see where like the growth of artificial intelligence just should stop, where we reach a peak where after that we don't really need to go too much further because then it might hurt productivity or profitability? And a third question would be, artificial intelligence is going to change how a lot of careers fundamentally work because it exists as a tool. It's going to make a lot of the mundane part of, a lot of what takes jobs being so long, it's going to make that go away. It's going to make it a lot simpler, a lot easier. But part of understanding how to use artificial intelligence is getting the education and learning how to use it. And obviously in like white collar careers, it comes with part of it, like learning comes as part of it because we're needed in that space. But with blue collar careers where like the work itself might be more mundane, not only the issue with job displacement, but I can imagine in this highly capitalistic economy that, some corporations won't want to go out of their way to fund the cost of educating their workers in how to use artificial intelligence. So how do you think corporations or our economy can tackle that? Like, should there be any regulations in place for those? But yeah, those are my two questions.
I'll take a quick crack at your first question. I don't think it's going to slow down. It took electricity 50 years to replace steam. And if you look at the computer industry, we're at about that point 50 years in. And now we're going to see the real innovation and the real digitalization because the technology has been in more of a formation period of time until now. I've been around long enough to have seen all of these, that's not going to last. The miniaturization of chips, right? Found a way around that, right? There's going to be constant innovations that are going to find new breakthroughs. Quantum computing is another one, right? And it has its issues right now, but within 5 to 10 years, those issues will be resolved. So I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I'll say this. I'll agree with that in that I actually don't think we'll reach a point where we say, oh yeah, that's good enough, right? I think we'll invent new problems. I think humans are just innately curious, and we will be curious about different things, right? maybe we won't worry as much about, how did this, what price the stock is going to be. Maybe we'll be worrying about something related to astrophysics. And I think we'll just kind of retarget our resources, retarget our capabilities. But I don't think we will refrain from continuing to challenge the technology.
So part of the thrust of that question was about what if we just keep developing? Does it get too far and then become unproductive? It becomes unproductive if it creates mass unemployment and people rioting. Yeah, that would be a measurement of unproductive, too much AI, if what it produces is income inequality and resource inequality to such an extent that it just breaks down society. That'd be too much. So we probably want to actively work to prevent that. Regarding the issue around like AI training for, say, blue collar work, if I understood the question correctly, I wouldn't worry overly much. Like replacing my plumber with a robot is a really long way away. Especially because my plumber has to not only be able to come to my house, his house, her house, like, and all our houses are different and have different like muddledness, and the plumbing's all very different. And so actually solving that problem is like super hard, way, way harder than how are we going to replace coders? Sorry, computer science majors.
And we have time for one more question, so thank you.
Hello, my name is Chiara Deschamps. I am a Camino program student, and I would like to ask, how do you see training for AI happening for underrepresented populations in technology like Hispanics?
It's a really awesome question, and it's one that we collectively are not handling well. We're not handling, I mean, the same issues that create algorithmic bias exist when we talk about training, when we talk about creating inclusiveness in the workplace, because you can look at things like, you can look at, say software engineers, and the black population in America is something like 12% or something, but the percentage of coders is something like 7 or 8%, right? So they're underrepresented in that coding universe. And actually, even if we put aside the justice issue, which we shouldn't because it matters that we make the world right, it's actually a practical problem. I had a friend who went to a Silicon Valley startup where they had a facial recognition software they were really excited about, and they were like, you got to see it, come sit down. And he sat down, and the facial recognition software couldn't see him, and they were like, well, I don't understand why it can't see you. It sees all of us. And he said, you don't see anything different about us? And everyone in the room was white, and he was black, and their system couldn't see him, which is literally a matter of life and limb if it's a system on a car, right? And we need it to know that you're a person when it sees you, right? So, I mean, there are so many contours around making sure we do this right and that we have people involved, and, because there are real practical outcomes from actually failing to create an inclusive workspace, an inclusive educational space. So it's one of those pressing ethical issues that we have to be actively pursuing doing it right.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard one. I think it does go back to sort of notions of equal opportunity, but I think educational institutions can play a big role in that. I think, the fact that, I think Robert made this point earlier, like, do you use ChatGPT to write your essay or not? One of the easiest thing for a higher education institution to do would be to say, no, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT. But that would actually be wrong for the student in that you're not then training them how to use that technology effectively. So the burden is then on the institution to say, well, assuming that that technology is available, how do I make the course more challenging? How do I, teach the same skills while assuming that the tool exists? So I think the burden kind of starts, again, it's not just universities. It kind of goes all the way back to, middle school, elementary school. I think we have to start there and say, introduce the technology early, and then as you learn to adopt it, you are actually helping shape it and train it.
Yeah, I'll just maybe broaden the answer a little bit by saying that, you know, one thing that you all have going for you is you're entering, hopefully, entering corporate America at a better time than us from the standpoint of diversity and inclusion. I can, you know, having been, you know, working professionally for 40 years, I could tell you that there's 100 times more focus on it now, at least 100 times more focus on it now than there was when I started. And I think that that's a good thing, and I think you'll benefit from it.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I don't want to keep you here much longer, but I'd like to first of all thank our President Milo Reverso, our Provost Dr. Ronnie Roy, our Associate Provost Dr. Kelly Moran, and the organizer of this event, Dr. William Clyde. I'd like to very much thank our panelists, Prashant Reddy, Steve Randish, and Robert Gerarsi here. Most importantly, I would like to thank all of you for attending today. This again is just the next in a series of events. Our very next panel on AI and workplace design is being hosted by the O'Malley School of Business right here in this room on November 8th at 6 p.m. So I hope to see many of you here for a continuing discussion of these issues. Thank you very much for attending, everyone, and have a good evening.